Let's stick with our top story now, the war in the Middle East and the tensions at home here in Australia. Labor MP Peter Khalil is the Special Envoy for Social Cohesion, appointed by the Prime Minister, and he joins us now in the studio. Good morning to you, Peter.
Morning, Bridget.
Hey, Peter.
Morning, Michael.
How are you?
Good, how are you? Good.
What does this new role entail?
Well, it's a good question. Everyone keeps asking me, what does social cohesion mean? In its essence, it's how we interact with each other as individuals, as members of groups in society, and do so in a way that is peaceful and respectful, even if there is difference and disagreement, and navigating through that difference and disagreement in a harmonious way. And of course, social cohesion is under threat when people are unable to do that and start to resort to hate speech or vilification or even violence. And so I think Australia's been a relatively harmonious, multi-ethnic, multi-faith, multicultural society based on the goodwill and hard work of generations of Australians. That's something we want to protect and enhance and try and uplift that resilience. And that's kind of the work that I've been involved with. Yeah.
The Prime Minister is firmly of the view that it won't be socially cohesive if Palestinians go ahead with rallies and vigils this weekend. Do you agree?
Well, Michael, I think everyone has a fundamental democratic right to protest peacefully on any day of the year. They have a legal right. The question about whether they should do that, particularly on the 7th of October, is really a question for those individuals and organisers to assess, because I think, from my personal perspective, the 7th of October obviously is a day in which there has been a horrific loss of Jewish lives, the largest since the Holocaust, and the Jewish Australian community are feeling that deep pain and anguish, and that day should be mourned, that loss should be mourned with the utmost respect. So it's really a question for those people to consider whether, you know, we have a shared humanity, we have a shared empathy, and whether it's appropriate to protest on that day. It's not a question of a legal question, setting aside the New South Wales permit laws and so on. It's a question about basic decency and whether you think it's appropriate to do that on that day. So I think that should be, you know, obviously a lot of Jewish Australians have been mourning with Palestinian and Muslim Australians who are feeling deep pain and anguish about the loss of innocent life in Gaza and have been protesting this for many, many months. So I think there's a question for people to really consider about their own decisions.
Nasser Mashni, just on the program, a prominent Palestinian leader, also saying that he feels that many Palestinians in Australia right now don't feel part of society. That must concern you. Why do you think that is?
Well, I wouldn't agree with that assessment. I think
he's a Palestinian man in Australia.
I wouldn't agree with that assessment. I know a lot of Palestinian Australians. I'm an Egyptian Australian background. I know a lot of Muslim Australians in the community. I think the really important thing is that sense of belonging that people have within Australia, that they feel like they're heard and they're engaged with.
So does that worry you, though, when someone who has also experienced a great deal of trauma, not just in the last year but over a long period of time, feels as though they're being told they can't go out to a peaceful rally in a democratic society? Is that a risk to cohesion?
I think it's the case that there has been protests, peaceful protests. The vast majority of protests, and there have been hundreds of protests over the course of the last 12 months, have been peaceful, as it should be. And people have had the right, the fundamental democratic right, to express themselves peacefully in those protests. And that has been allowed and that has been permitted because it's part of our democratic right. And whether you're a Muslim Australian or a Palestinian Australian or Egyptian Australian or any Australian of any background, you have a right to do that, and that has been permitted over a long period of time. I don't think the question around the 7th of October, going back to the earlier question, is really one of personal decision on that, and notwithstanding the New South Wales issue.
Yep. OK, but you're the envoy. What's your advice to Palestinians thinking of holding protests on Sunday, but rallies as well on the actual anniversary day? What do you tell them? You've been given this job by the Prime Minister.
I can't tell people what to do.
What would you advise them to do?
As I said earlier, I think this is a question around I don't care whether you're Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Hindu. We are all Australians. We all belong as part of this country. We have rights within our democratic system. We have lots of rights. We also have privileges. We also have obligations and responsibilities as being citizens as well. And people have every legal right to protest. There is a question in people's minds about whether there's an appropriateness to do that on that particular day, given that the Jewish Australian community is mourning what was a horrific loss. And that's just really just a matter of basic decency, or just thinking through what is our shared humanity and feeling the empathy for others that are suffering, because we all want to see the end of all human suffering. It doesn't matter. The loss of all innocent life, regardless of one's background, is something that we want to see an end to. And I think that's demonstrated in those protests and in those rallies and so on. And I just think there's a fair bit of polarisation here where we want to bring Australians together and feel the other's pain. And I think that's an important step that we need to take as a society.
So then what will be the practical steps for you as envoy to enhance that understanding of empathy?
Yeah, it's a good question, because a lot of what we're facing, there's socioeconomic disadvantage, which is a driver where people feel disempowered. There's intergenerational unfairness. There's political populism, frankly, where bad actors are using these grievances, manipulating them to create anger as well for short-term political gain. And there's issues with the media. Not your media, by the way. Breakfast TV is fantastic, but clearly with all the advantages of access to digital technology and social media, there's also issues around the way that algorithms drive people into pockets of difference and polarise them. There's different sets of facts almost, and different sets of realities. So it makes it much harder for people to engage in that constructive way, in that harmonious way. That polarisation is fed and manipulated. So we have a lot of work to do to try and mitigate some of those risks, but also uplift the resilience of people within society to be able to engage peacefully and respectfully, even if there is disagreement. There's lots of different ideas and programs and initiatives that we're working on. We've provided a lot of funding and support for communities that are feeling this at the moment, the pain and the anguish given the Middle East war. But it's broader than that as well. It's all of the elements of our society: sporting leaders, business leaders, media leaders, community, multicultural organisations, because our harmonious multicultural society does not exist except for the fact of the goodwill and hard work of people who embrace others.
Peter Khalil, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming in. Now let's go to Queensland.